Hello, hi Dominic.
Hello, sir. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's all right.
I had to click on five different buttons to unmute.
I hope you're doing okay. You doing
Uh,
okay?
I'm doing well here. Now you're in the car with my kids and me.
Hi, right on.
We're doing good. On our way back from picking kids up from school. How are you?
Good, doing well, thank you.
We got
So
anybody
yeah,
else in here?
what's that?
Just you and I. Just
It's
you and
just you
I,
and
huh?
I so far.
Let me ask you a couple of questions real quick,
Sure.
and you're probably gonna go over this. I'm jumping right in. Test four.
Yes.
You don't. Is there? You're gonna let that. You're gonna release that at
Um,
some point.
yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Okay. I saw it on the syllabus and I was like, well, where the heck is it? I think we only got 2 days left. What's going on?
Oh yeah, it should be up. Yeah, I'm
You put
let
a
me write
second
it.
there's a second test three up.
Oh no, I wonder if I did the wrong one.
I think I think.
Okay, thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
Okay,
I was
because
just I'm looking at it, I'm like, how are we gonna get this done with 2 days? But
oh my goodness. Okay, that's terrible. Okay, I copied and pasted the wrong one. But the good news is I wrote out because you have to copy and paste each uh, each question, each option. It's very, very tedious. And I
oh
did for test four for the other class. So it should be a matter of just going back to test four in the other class and forward it to
oh
you guys.
throwing
And then I'll give you a
th-
message as well.
okay,
Okay, sorry
perfect.
about that. Thank you for bringing
Yeah,
that to my attention.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in cases like that, if that would have carried over, I just would have I would have taken test four out of the base of analysis. You guys will never be punished for my mistakes. All right, and so remember that with my history that I put together, it's usually a combination of the basic historical arts and sciences that we mention so often. You have a conflict history that is so common in Chicano history, and that is as you look for competition, conflict, power relations, power dynamics, and you try to elicit the empathy of those who, quote, lost. All right. And so you show the way by which Mexican Americans were discriminated against, the manner by which they suffered, and so forth. Then you do some agency, because, of course, different groups, demographics like Latinos don't like to just the condescending tone of them being victimized all the time, which, of course, wasn't always the case. So then you show their agency, right? You show how they made decisions that mattered. They did things that helped turn the course of events, et cetera, et cetera. So then you have that. And then, of course, when you're doing that, you have great man and great woman history. We look at people that were influential in positions of power, et cetera, and what they did to help inaugurate the direction in which history went. And then, of course, you have structural history. And structural history are forces that are bigger than any individual, like economics, uh, so forth, culture, that help turn the tide of events as well. So that basically is what I'm doing, is I'm trying to give a combination of those types of arts and sciences of history together into this narrative. I mainly use Chicano history books. um, I'm somewhat familiar with like the big ones that are commonly used in the classes. You got a guy named Rodolfo Acuna. You have a book called Harvest of Empire. You have a guy named Felipe Armesto Diaz. Um, you have anyway, I just kind of go over those books and then do some of my U.S. history and um, and try to tie the two together. So at any rate, when I put together the information for number one, I think you'll find that everything fits in that section except for the behavior of Mexican Americans. I didn't get into that micro level as far as, and not only that, I wasn't going to get into the argument that the behavior of Mexican Americans here in the United States, I don't know that field well enough, first of all, in the 1920s, that helped dictate the manner by which they were treated politically by our government. And so that's the one that doesn't fit. Um, Number two, I think you'll find that I make the argument that railroads brought uh, culture and cultural dissemination, right? People borrowing culture from one another that tends to follow the marketplace. And so that's usually commonly assumed, and it's commonly stated in the 1920s as no different. The Dillingham Commission was it cosmopolitan? Well, if you take a look at it, they put strict requirements on who could come from what country. And they said only 2% of those who had been here in 1890 in the census could come each year uh, to deal with the Southern and Eastern Europeans, the new immigrants that had come in such large numbers at the turn of the century. So that's hardly cosmopolitan. The Immigration Act of 24, again, was it an act of tolerance? No, I don't think so. Um, and then five and seven rolled together is I make the subjective argument that at least in the 1920s, that economics prevailed over culture. That there was kind of an xenophobic element to American culture in the 1920s. You look at the rise of the KKK. You look at a conservative movement against the Harlem Renaissance and jazz music. You have that, like I said, these restrictive Dillingham Commission laws and immigration acts. There was definitely kind of an xenophobic, kind of fearfully hateful toward people and things that are outside their realm of familiarity during the 1920s. Nevertheless, there was such a great demand from big businesses to have campesino daily agricultural workers, workers in the obrajes or the factories. And so economics prevailed, according to the sources in the 1920s, that despite the xenophobia, it was open for the taking for Mexican Americans. So I make the very, argumentative point that could or could not be true, and it doesn't mean to be a definitive point about all decades, but that during the 1920s, economics prevailed over virtually everything. Um, then you have the fact that the Mexican American people became a hybrid people. I think you'll find that I state just that in that section. Let's see here. Now, did they, as Hispanics, as Latinos, did they um, receive equal treatment in FDR's New Deal? And if you look through the section, I make the argument that they did not. I have a book that I got most of that information from, and it is The Color of Law. I got it just from Barnes and Nobles. But they go over the history of segregation and discrimination in the 20th century, early 20th century. And they give details on New Deal programs. The problem was, right, that I put in the argumentative setup is that they allowed the local governments and the state governments to run these national um, agencies. And that was kind of a compromise that Franklin Roosevelt was willing to make because his agencies and his New Deal were quite controversial. And so that was kind of a concession on his part to let the local and state governments kind of carry them out. Not entirely by any means, but the work relief in particular. So when it got into the hands of local people, they just used their local prejudices and put them into practice in hiring people and who they didn't hire, etc. With the Okies coming in, Although even when the Mexican Americans and the Mexican immigrants were willing to work for less, that does not mean that the jobs were given to them. Of course, that is not the case. In that case, right, economics did not win during the Depression when everyone tightened the belt and hysteria and fear took over and desperation. There was quite a lot of pressure upon all businesses of every level and in every industry to hire Americans first. So there were deportations and so forth as well. Um, the U.S. in fighting a just war against fascism, I think you'll find all of those fit except for state control over private property. Even though they say German National Socialism, they're not communistic. They don't have state control over private property. They had their famous German big businesses that had a free reign to make plenty of profit, as long as, of course, to specifications required by the military and prices paid by the military, they towed the line. Then you have America's behavior during World War II. When I choose a wrong answer, I need to make it more overtly wrong. But I just slightly exaggerated on the last one that there were at least three occasions in which Japanese interns were shot. I only know of one, and so yeah, I only know of one, and I mentioned that in uh, Tulare. All right. The handout claims that despite cultural prejudice that Latinos had to contend with, residential segregation, politically poor representation, and lower income levels were already becoming problems of the past by the time World War II erupted. No, no. There, that's where you have in a lot of textbooks parts of the chapter where it says where the other half lived, in the 1930s and 40s. Um, I mean, you even have that part of a chapter, even in the booming 50s and early 60s. So how much more before World War II? Despite the heroism of Mexican American soldiers, some were refused burial. So you'll find that in there as well, with that gentleman's name. And then we're Japanese Americans, right? The Nisei, the sons of Issei, the sons of the Japanese immigrants and daughters, were they able to be interned constitutionally? Yes, right, according to the Korematsu versus the U.S. Fred Korematsu of Fresno pled his 14th Amendment rights, and they said, well, we're in an anomalous time. We're in an out of the ordinary time where this is time of military emergency, and therefore even citizens under the 14th Amendment can be interned for the safety of the country. So I thought that was very interesting, a little scary, but interesting. Um, According to Latinos in the Cold War, the writer contends that Latinos face frustration over their failure to experience any upward mobility. No, when you find that, right, when you find that handout on the Cold War, I try to abide by a balance and making the argument that socioeconomically, Latinos did much better during the 50s and the early 60s, in the early Cold War era. The GI Bill, the FHA, and so forth, they did help facilitate, quote, colored middle class. Um, the stats are just evidently there. The per capita income and disposable income all went up pretty impressively during the 1950s across the board. And so, at least on paper. And so, while they were doing better, right, they were stifled by Cold War culture. They were disappointed by the way in which our government dealt with Latin American countries. That's was their sort of frustration, right? A lot of these middle class Latinos. And then, of course, right, they could see that their Latino brethren were still suffering segregation and discrimination, being kept out by poll taxes and literacy tests to be able to vote, gerrymandering and manipulating their districts and keeping them a numerical minority for every rep that they voted for. And then of course they were segregated and discriminated in school. I don't know if you had the chance to choose the one in schools, but the video on schools is pretty telling of what they did. They just kind of what's the word? They pigeonholed them. They made them take shop. And not that there's anything wrong with shop, as they say in the video, but they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice. So they had them work in the warehouse and do things that involved skilled but yet still manual labor. And none of them were being tailored for academia, for like a good, prestigious four-year university. Okay. And they couldn't pull in the best teachers, the best textbooks, the best supplemental material because their budget was contingent upon local property taxes and other taxes, and the people were poor in their areas. So that's not going to change until LBJ. Okay. Which of the following is false regarding the American Cold War drama with Latin American countries? Again, this one is slightly false, probably not false enough. But look at B. Fidel Castro immediately nationalized American corporate property and declared himself a communist, allying himself with the Soviet Union. No, that did not happen immediately. All right. Um, And then you think, no, 19 can't be true, right? Because they're representing Latinos. Conservative Latino organizations like the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, they were like the NAACP, openly embraced America's political culture of forced conformity and angst over a fifth column of traitors in an effort to prove their loyalty and unity with white America. Sadly, in the textbooks, that is true. So you have more, straightforward, confrontational, less into integration with the Anglos organizations during the Chicano movement, and they're going to look a little bit at LULAC as Uncle Tom's. All right, yeah, and so labor union organizers and later some civil rights leaders fell under the scrutinizing supervision of the FBI and its counterintelligence program. What did this not entail for Latinos? Of course, publicly inflicted physical violence is a little far. And we know, right, that a part of the counterintelligence program entailed some gunfights with members of the Black Panthers in Oakland and in Alameda. But like I said, with the Latino group, as far as public physical violence, that's a little much. Let's see here. What is false about the nonviolent civil disobedient movement? Look at the word unintentionally, the adverb. Television unintentionally enhanced the effectiveness of their movement. No, it was not unintentional at all. It was planned. They knew exactly what they were doing, and it was clever, right? You have a law, a civic law that violates a higher law. You go and you defy that law. You expect them, as Gandhi had said, to react in a violently defensive manner, and you make sure the cameras are on you, and you make sure that you keep the high road, and you don't retaliate, and you make sure that everybody else sees it. And as King had said, right, he borrowed a phrase from the Romans that most Americans were tending their own garden, were worried about their own private lives, and too busy with their own private lives to worry about racial discrimination. And they needed to have this hit them when they sat down with their TV dinners in the evening on the television, right, on the boob tube. So let's see here. Which of the following does not fit? Now, I think I feel pretty safe in asserting this on my own. I have not outright read this as a quote, but I've certainly been given this idea. Is when you look at D, JFK was more liberal and militant than his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson? No. A lot of people contend that John F. Kennedy would not be considered liberal, very liberal at all today, by his standards and what he was willing to stand for and what he was willing to advocate. Um, LBJ, right? Especially with his notion of like affirmative action and those types of programs. From what I've read, Kennedy was not willing to go to that degree to try to rectify racial discrimination. So that one doesn't fit. Um, which of the following does not cite the Chicano movement leader with his or her contributions? So this one's kind of a superficial question. You're just making sure that you have the right leaders with the right movements. And look at B, Jose Angel Gutierrez. He was not a LULAC lawyer. He was a well-educated guy with his master's, but he was not a LULAC lawyer. He was part of Mayo. He was part of the Cristal movement in Crystal City, Texas. He went to Denver and helped form La Raza Unida Party. He was at the head of a lot of things, but he was not a well-known LULAC lawyer. All right. If you watch the video, you know that 24 is true. All right. The lie that he caught the growers into, right? They lied about what they were paying and what they were offering their workers. So he sent some people undercover to work for them, and they caught them. They got evidence of them paying them much less and doing much less for their employees. And he gave the choice to the growers. He said, I can go public with this and ruin you, or we could go to the table and negotiate. And they agreed to negotiate instead. So he had that power in his hands, and he was pretty meek with it. On public schools, what did they ask for? It's funny that a lot of the groups that really emphasize integration got a hard time with the more, quote, what they were called back then, militant civil rights groups, right? This is one of the reasons for which Martin Luther King was dubbed an Uncle Tom by Malcolm X. Said you're fighting to sit side by side with the white wolves who mistreat you in a lunch counter. And so, same thing with the Latino group. This group was, if you watch the video, they were pretty adamant and they were even pretty angry. The tone of their movement. They're in 67 in LA. And so they did not push, at least outwardly, on their agenda and what their demands they made when they stayed in the city council building and refused to evacuate. They did not push for integration with Anglo students. Okay. Let's see here. And then you could easily have guessed this number 26 because it goes with my phrase that it was an interesting juxtaposition. There was an element of separatism amongst the leaders at Denver for the Mexican American Party, and there was an element of integration. And so look at option B, a Chicano represented region of Aztlan. Remember when you look at the Codex Mendoza and the Florence Codex and others, they contend that the Aztec came from a fabled land in the Northwest as they traveled down through Mexico. And so some people surmise that their fabled land, if that codex is true, comes from present day Southwest of the United States. So they wanted an Aztlan region with somewhat semi-autonomy, but yet working in and with Congress and within our federal republic, as you see in B. Regarding the video on Chicano political mobilization, the Crystal City movement accomplished. Yeah, that's supposed to be movement accomplished. It's spoken in the video. Option B. It entailed the Chicano lesson on obtaining and maintaining political power. Their strength in numbers. So they did everything. They sold tortillas and food. They had dance competitions and dance marathons. They did everything they could to raise money to pay for all the Mexican American people's poll taxes. They had students sit down and prep the older, less educated Latinos on the literacy test that was to come before it was eradicated by Lyndon B. Johnson's administration in 65 with the Voting Rights Act. What was not mentioned as possible motivation for LBJ, this is great man history, but it's fun. He was an intriguing guy, this LBJ. And when you look right, all this is found in the section. It should be, except for the last one. I don't know of him having any kind of overt plan to win over Southern Republicans. Okay. And then number 29 comes straight out of the handout. Economic success, demographic growth, change of movement into the suburbs and out of the cities, um, removal of impediments to congressional committees so that certain Southern gentlemen that were very, very conservative could not keep a hold on laws being brought up and passed. Um, Television and improved infrastructure helped create a national culture. All of that was mentioned except for fond memories of the New Deal, as far as big government becoming in vogue at that time. What was not included with mass legislation during the rise of liberalism, increased minimum wages, unemployment compensation, and food stamps, yes. At least three major civil rights bills against discrimination, yes. Consumer protection legislation like the EPA, environmental protection, of course. Training, education, and employment programs, some run by the poor themselves, absolutely. That was true. And what was it? The Equal Opportunity Committees, the EOCs. Federal work relief programs, some consisting solely of minorities. No, they didn't do that. 31, according to the handout, the conservative resurgence supposedly originated from a widespread interpretation of liberalism as having gone too far, become excessive. Absolutely. I'm getting a lot of this from the book Reaganland. It's an interesting book. It focuses on the years simply from 76 to 80 and how the liberal uh, momentum kind of flopped in that time, and it fell right into the hands of Reagan. Because of mass publicization of the historical legacies of discrimination at the workplace, affirmative action actually constituted one of the least controversial products of liberal rule. No, you'll find a decent sized paragraph containing that was always very controversial from the get-go. You have the guy at UC Davis, right, that claimed that it was reverse discrimination, and yeah, you that absolutely that was very controversial and remains so. How much more from 76 to 80? The old Truman era Democratic Cold War policy of deterrence by way of an arms race ran its course with conservatives. No, it was the opposite. They wanted to return to deterrence and an arms race and show of strength by in the legacy of Eisenhower, Republican Eisenhower. And so Reagan, right, he said that we've become a laughing stock, we've become a joke. We're selling dangerous arms to Saudi Arabia just to try to win them over. We're not supporting Israel at that time. Iran had a revolution, right, and took the 52 American hostages, and nothing was done about that for quite some time. He tried to send a helicopter mission, and that flopped. Carter, that is. And of course, the Sandinistas, named after Agustino Sandino, who wanted land redistribution to the poor in Nicaragua. They took over and they thumbed their nose at the United States and at U.S. corporations. They began nationalizing them. So not even expropriation where you pay them market value for their property. You just outright take it in nationalization. And so all of that, right, made America arguably look weak and vulnerable. You had the crisis of confidence speech by Carter, etc. So, yeah, that one doesn't fit. According to the handout, judicial decisions during the liberal era ran too counter to individual autonomy. No, right? The argument was they ran so far in favor of individual autonomy that they challenged very traditional American standards of morality. So at this time, right, according to the textbooks, they were defending adult film stars, defend just real controversial stuff. Okay, and I'm sorry if I shouldn't have mentioned that. Um, but at any rate, uh, yeah, they Anglin versus Vitale, they took prayer out of public schools, etc. And the idea, right, with that, it wasn't just the traditional hold that Christianity had over the Midwest and the South, etc. It was also the idea of the democratic part of our republic. That you had this. I remember all the way through the '90s, where what if like 2/3, if not more, a higher percentage than that, of a football team wanted to pray before a football game, but there was just one or two people that felt offended by such, and they could keep everybody else from doing it. And so that became quite controversial. The courts, the liberal courts of the '60s and '70s, and then of course Jesse Miranda, who admitted to have done something to a woman, and because they didn't read him his rights, his Miranda rights, he was exonerated. All right. And then 35, it is suggested that the revolutions in Nicaragua and in Iran actually assisted Reagan's political rise to the presidency, and that is absolutely what Reagan land contends. All right. And so that in '67, when the Chicano movement was really at its height, arguably, newer big government liberalism was arguably at its height, and what's in favor of supporting the Chicano movement and supporting the rights of minorities and supporting the rights of individual autonomy, supporting the rights of rectifying wrongs and trying to deal with inequity and build equity from it. And then in the '80s, things took a different direction. They went back to conservatism, a more libertarian outlook of government staying out of business, staying out of people's affairs, employers' affairs as to whom they would or would not hire, etc. All right. So that's basically it. But yeah, thank you for bringing that to my attention, Dominic. I'm gonna give an announcement to everybody.
Don't tell anybody else that I brought that up.
You got it. You got
I should have kept my mouth shut.
it. No, that's yeah,
I'm
like I
thinking
said,
this
I
whole
know
I'm
that
thinking this,
I went through the time of copying and pasting these 35 questions
yeah.
to another class. But when I do that, you sure as heck don't want to do that 3 times. So you have a copy and paste
Yeah.
option to copy and paste it to another course.
That's
And
what I was wondering when I saw 2 test 3, I said, oh well.
I'm sorry about that. That was definitely a mistake. All right. And so but Dominic, are you doing well? Are you doing everything going okay? You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yes, I'm 40 coming back to school after being wounded in the military and everything. So I mean, this is just it's just a lot. But
yeah.
I mean, it's the step I had to step into the door to college at some point, so
Yeah. Well, I'm proud of you. Good for you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, sir. What's the I didn't look and see there's not a final.
No, no, test 4 is the final.
That's it. Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right. So you take care,
You'll
Dominic.
have this. I was driving, so of course I couldn't sit there and write everything down that you're talking about. You'll have this as a
I'll
video.
post it.
Okay.
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay.
Appreciate it, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
You take care.
Thanks, you too. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.